one important area, which is big data. Of course, the characteristics of big data, it is big. Why? Because it's coming from different sources and it's covering many aspects. Certainly, when you want to use big data, you have to make sure it doesn't step over the confidentiality and the privacy of people. At the same time, it has to be open. Now, government, as mentioned today by opening remarks, is the biggest producer maybe of data. And of course, social media now are competing with that. They're also producing a lot of information. But the important thing is government needs to share information. And that's a practice. It is improving, I agree, but we still have a way to go where government really puts the information in the service of the people. We have seen that in many initiatives from the government, and hopefully this trend will continue. Now, certainly, you need the data to be available, you need it to keep the privacy, and you need to make use of it. And making use of it is not only by government pushing the information to the citizen, it is by private sector, by other entities, non-profit, academic community, making use of these and producing more and more services and information built on that. So today's session will have 4 viewpoints on that. And mainly they are addressing how modernizing governments through enterprise techniques and using big data and cloud computing. The first speaker today is Dr. Mohammmed Al-Shaibi. Dr. Mohammad is the advisor to the Director General of NIC. Of course, NIC has a lot of data. And certainly they are playing a big role in this environment. Dr. Mohammad, of course, participated in many countrywide initiatives, the Y2K issue and how it was handled across all the government. He also participates in many committees where MOI collaborates with many different government entities. So we'll listen to his viewpoint in a while, the big data in e-government, big value and big efficiency. The second speaker for today is Engineer Majid Al-Adwan. Engineer Majid, of course, has a lot of experience to show in this domain. He has managed huge projects in several $billions, 7 billion riyals. So he has developed a system to connect 500 notaries and courts. Of course, that was a great achievement by the Ministry of Justice to automate all this work. So it's not only to access the information, but to make it also available internally for the Ministry for auditing, to have references, to have archive. So they had many objectives in launching that project, and that was a big success. They also integrated the court systems to archive and to serve 25,000 employees internally. So all of these people are using the system. The third viewpoint for today is going to be presented by Mr. Antoine Johan Coetzee. He's the Director of Technical Support at the SAS Institute. Everybody knows SAS, how they work with intelligence and business intelligence systems and dashboards. He oversees the data integration and strategy management and manages all technical support. So that goes from analysis and planning and design and implementation of solutions architecture. They also provide the technical leadership for software implementations. And his viewpoint will be about enterprise intelligence and analysis for e-government efficiency. Now we'll go to the fourth speaker, Mr. Andrey Sokurenko. Mr. Andrey is the Director of Business Development in InfoWatch. InfoWatch, of course, includes Mr. Andrey is handles corporate business development, so market analysis and international strategy for the global business. Of course, InfoWatch have a lot to say that, and the speech today is going to be about governance and risk management, and that's an important area to cover. So we'll get started with the PowerPoints for the first speaker, so we can go ahead for today. No PowerPoints, okay. All right, so Dr. Al-Shaibi.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير الأنبياء رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. First of all, I'd like to thank Nasiba for organizing the summit, and also for Yasser for providing the support, and the sponsors who are participating in making this event happen. Then I'd like to, yes, as Mr. Moufid presented, I'm currently now the advisor to the Director General of the National Information Center. However, previously I was the Assistant Director General for Technical Affairs, and I was running the data center and taking care of the infrastructure for the Ministry of Interior and for the NIC, which, as Mr. Moufid also mentioned, it is one of the largest data centers, not only in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but in the Middle East. I've also worked in preparing the first National IT Plan, and I also participated in the second National IT Plan. That's a brief introduction. What I want to say here is, as the topic is a session to talk, I think I have some views, especially since now I'm an advisor. I'm going to play the other side. I've always been in the operational side. Now I'm in the advisor role. So I'd like to provide you with some inputs based on the challenges that I faced running the data center for the NIC, and where I think that we should be going to take our initiatives to the next step. First of all, I think that the government of Saudi Arabia, and with the role that Yasser has played, we have achieved enormous successes in our e-government and the electronic transaction. This is not only by Yasser's claiming that, or the Ministry of Communication and IT claiming that. This is witnessed by the UN and the other third party who evaluate the e-government readiness of the countries. And I think based on the survey that was presented yesterday for the 2012 results of the UN, I think that Saudi Arabia is now, according to my knowledge, I think it was 41, and the previous one it was 58. However, let's put this in context. Now, if we go to the chart, we see that the number one was Korea. Since 2010, it's number one, and 2008, number one. And also, let's go back home to the GCC. We see that the United Arab Emirates are also improving, and they did a substantial improvement, maybe better than in the case of Saudi Arabia. They moved from 49, I think, to 28. We also look at Bahrain. Bahrain is going in the other direction, so that might not be a positive sign. They were from 13 going all the way down to 36, so that was a negative change. So I think Saudi Arabia, if we are classified, we are third out of 5 in the GCC states, but we are going in the right direction. However, we must understand that for us to go to the next level, we have to see what are the challenges and the weaknesses that we are facing. We are approaching in the area where we are going to a smart government, where we want to provide cloud services. We are looking at big data, and in addition to mobile solutions. So these are new challenges that we are facing, and they are not just the basic e-transactions. They are going above. Before I go into the challenges, I'd like to define big data, and the difference between big data and open data. Is all big data, should it be open data? And there is a difference. Open data, the only distinguishing, it does not have any personal information, so it does not release. So if you're talking about the schools, to see which school to take your kids, it doesn't have who are the current schools in the teach. If you're going to the hospital, it doesn't have the names of the patients. So that's kept confidentiality. So that's the difference between big data and open data. Big data also is defined. Why do they call it big? It's usually based either based on the volume of the data that's generated, or the size of the data. It might be a video clip, it might be a media, it might be an email, or the velocity of how much the data changes, if it's taken from a temperature sensor or from any other commercial aspect. Now, down on these definitions, and let's go to the issues that I think I want to present in this session, is where we should, to go to the next step, we are facing challenges. To ignore our weaknesses and to continue in the same direction without identifying the challenges and the risks that we are facing, I don't think we'll be able to meet these challenges or meet the objectives that are set by our national institutes. And I think that yesterday's presentation in the Qiyas 5, I think the results, they were talking to 150 plus government sectors. And some of them, I think the majority of them responded, and they participated in this Qiyas. Now, if you just take this result, which is very good, and you're saying that if you have 150 plus, are the 150 government agencies going to build their own data centers? If they are, that's a huge challenge. I was running a big data center, and I know that there are many challenges in running data center. Now, if every 150 data centers you're going to build, you're going to face many issues. One, the availability, because if you provide a service, it has to be available 24 hours by 7. Citizens expect the service to be available. You also have to make sure that you provide a disaster recovery. There should be the necessary backup mechanisms. You also are collecting data and storing data, and this data is related to the people, on the citizens, and the residents of the Saudi Arabia. So you also, once you build this data center, you also have to consider the data privacy and the security. And it is a known fact. We should not shy away. There's a conference here, and I think Nasib is organizing another conference in the next day regarding the cybersecurity issues. It is a fact that out of a study that I heard, Saudi Arabia is the 11th most target country with respect to cyber attacks. So that's something that we cannot control. We live in a world in which maybe you have enemies who would like to attack your, and I think Anonymous is one of those groups that regularly, and we get notifications from our Saudi CERT saying that there is a potential attack and beware and take the necessary. So that is that's a very important issue. And we should also identify that the data should be considered as a national asset. Similar to our factories, to our oil, to our gas industry, data should be classified and treated as a national asset, and therefore it requires that the organizations who maintain and hold our data to take the utmost precautions to protect it from either being hacked or being tampered with or changed. The other issue is, if running a data center, it's not your initial investment that you might get from a one-time project. There is also running costs of providing of a data center. And I think this is where the Ministry of Finance, especially now we have a maybe good budget, and there is good initiatives, and there's a program. Yes, it is very generous in providing the initial capital investment. However, there is also a sustainability of services. In the Ministry of Interior, when we first implemented the e-services, or collecting the payments, through the electronic methods rather than the traditional, either you go to the cashier or you buy a coupon from somebody who's on the pavement. And we connected directly to the banks at that time before Sadat. Actually, it was Riyadh Bank and Rajhi Bank. There were some problems, as any services, after we did the service. And then we said, okay, we'll go back to that. And the traffic department said, no, there is no going back. We don't have any cashiers. We don't have any, you can't go back. So once you define an e-service, it's very difficult to go back to the paper-based service. So the operational cost is something that is very important that you have to, and the operation is not only to maintain the hardware, you also have to pay the software licenses, you have to keep the human resources, and there are many other costs involved. Also, if you're, let's say, 150 data centers, the availability to acquire and retain qualified human resources is a challenge. And I challenge any of my colleagues in the government sector. One of their most difficult challenge is to try to get the necessary resources, whether locally or even externally, because it's a global problem, and I think some of my speakers will address. In big data, there is a global shortage of people who are with the necessary skills. So it becomes even more important. So I think that these are challenges, but before we go into introducing more services, not say we don't, but we should address these problems that we are facing before and take it into consideration. I have some ideas on how we can address them, but I think that it is very important that we address them. We don't shy away, and we also learn from other countries in other countries in the world. The problems that I've just mentioned, the 4 problems that I've mentioned, are common to every single country. No country can say that they are not aware or not or immune to any cyber attacks. No country can say that we have enough human resources. Nobody can say that the cost of running a data center, whether it's by power, and some countries are facing the actual cost of the electricity to cool and to maintain is a very high cost, or to the sensitivity and the privacy is also a national concern. So I think these are common problems. Many governments have faced them, and they faced them maybe in 2002 before Saudi Arabia has addressed them. So we should learn to see what other countries have done to address these problems. A case in point, I think I was in a trip in Korea, and I think that the Korean government, even in the UN, is #1. So I think we should learn. We should not say that we are by ourselves in the world. We should, one, face up to the challenges. We know where we want to go. These challenges are there, and countries have addressed them, and we should learn from them in proceeding. Now, the last issue that I want to say. Now, big data, if you are only going to focus on the data that you have available, whether how big or small it is, I don't classify this as big data. This might be business intelligence, it might be a business. However, the power of big data is when you get data from multiple sources and correlate this data such that it provides value to the organization that you're talking about. I think the example, if let's say if we have from the healthcare perspective or the healthcare, if it is nice for each hospital to publish its mortality rates for, let's say, heart, open heart surgery. This is just an example. It's nice to see that maybe this hospital, they do 20 or 30 open heart operations, some do bypass operations. It would be very nice to see that they have experience in doing it. However, what is their mortality rate? I don't know. The only, I know people in the health industry who have come to the Ministry of Interior. They say, we'd like to see how good our services are by tying this to how long the patient lives. Because the hospitals will say, yes, we did 100 operations, and they were all successful and nobody died. However, if you go into the details, within a week, everybody died. So that doesn't, after they left the hospital. So that's really not a very good statistics. You want to see how, and compare the results with other hospitals globally. And it's not fair to say somebody who does an easy operation, you have to take this personal data to see how old he is, what other medical conditions he has, and compare such you're comparing apples to apples. And this information can only be done if you get the personal data and combine it and correlate the data, but you have to protect the privacy such that you tell this government you're doing X amount of operations and your mortality rate is comparable to that of a US hospital or whatever. And that's where you can find value. Also, the same examples, if you're a Ministry of Labor, they are trying to do many efforts to try to find employment for Saudi citizens. And the problem, one of the problems that they are facing is that the graduates, maybe from the Saudi universities, are not all the same. Some university will have very high qualified people, some will less. How do you know? They'll say, well, we have 100 people who graduated from this with all honors, first degree honors, but none of them are employable. That is not a very good reflection. The only way you can really tell if the program is good is if you tie this information with where they were employed, what was their starting salary, did they go to the private sector, were they employed as a security personnel for 2,000 riyal plus 2,000 riyal from HRDF. That's not very good. I think I've taken, I'll be more than happy. I have some ideas on how we can address these challenges. I would be more than happy to discuss them, anybody who is interested, and I will also be willing to take any other questions.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Al-Shaibi, for sharing the challenges and the recommendations on using big data. Now, we'll keep the questions to the end of the panel for the sake of time, and we'll move now to our next speaker, Engineer Al-Adwan. So please go ahead.
الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. يمكن أنا ببدأ بشرح تجربتنا في وزارة العدل في وزارة العدل. احنا نتكلم طبعا عن الموضوع السحابية وذا، احنا كان او والكونسوليديشن والعمليات هذه. احنا قبل 4 سنوات كانت عندنا مجموعة إشكاليات، ان عندنا أكثر من 30 داتا سنتر في وزارة العدل. في بعض كتابات العدل اللي كانت تشتغل إلكتروني كانت فيها داتا سنتر مستقل. فكان عندنا أزمة في بعض المحاكم، حدود 13 محكمة نفس الشيء عندها داتا سنتر. الداتا سنتر الرئيسي كان يخدم بعض كتابات العدل البسيطة وبنطاق ضيق. معذرة نتكلم بالعربي إذا كان ما في إشكال. الخطوة اللي قمنا فيها تم بناء بنية تحتية، وضعنا لنا محورين أساسيين للعمل: طرح مناقصات في الإجراءات الحكومية تأخذ وقت طويل. بدأنا في الحلول العاجلة، أنشأنا داتا سنتر مصغر وبدأنا نسحب الأجهزة من المحاكم اللي تشتغل، وبدل ما كانت عبارة عن جزر متفرقة أصبحنا نعمل مركزيا. خلال تقريبا من 4 إلى 6 أشهر تقريبا أكملنا سحب حدود 30 جهة وشغلناها عندنا في مركز المعلومات المؤقت. استفدنا من التجهيزات الموجودة في المحاكم حتى توسعنا إلى 200 بين محكمة وكتابة عدل، حتى تم إنجاز داتا سنتر يلبي طموح وزارة العدل في الخدمات المستقبلية. استكملنا بناء البنية التحتية وشبكة الحاسب الآلي في هذا الوقت في 400 مبنى. وفرنا خدمة الإنترنت والخدمات الإلكترونية في حدود أكثر من 200 محكمة و180 كتابة عدل برنامج الوكالات، وحدود 80 كتابة عدل عقاري، وحدود 86 فيما يخص محاكم التنفيذ. فأصبحت العملية عندنا مركز معلومات متكامل يخدم الوزارة في ظرف وجيز. ضمن منظومة إعادة ترتيب العمل عندنا قمنا بإعادة هندسة إجراءات العمل في محاكم الدرجة الأولى، المحاكم الدرجة الأولى والاستئناف والعليا وكتابات العدل الأولى والثانية وقضاء التنفيذ والتسجيل العيني. وأيضا أعدنا ترتيب العمل بالكامل ومن ثم تحويله للإجراءات الإلكترونية، فأصبح الناس تباشر في الخدمات. أصبحنا مؤهلين وجاهزين للربط مع شقيقتنا الكبرى وزارة الداخلية، لهم منا كل الشكر في موضوع البصمة. وأيضا موضوع البصمة جعل عندنا نقلات كبيرة. أتوقع أننا ننافس معظم دول العالم فيما يخص التحاكم الإلكتروني، التحاكم عن بعد، الاستخلاف عن بعد اللي مقاضاة عن بعد، الشهادة عن بعد، الترجمة عن بعد. فهذه كلها عمليات أن نعمل عليها في إجراءات الموضوع. اعتمادية مركز معلومات وزارة العدل عندها اعتمادية عالية. بدأنا ببناء مركز معلومات ضخم لخدمة القطاع العدلي إجمالا، وما عندنا مشكلة في الارتباط بأي جهة. اعتمادية من ناحية الباور، الكولينج، السيرفرز، استخدام البيئة السحابية فيما يخص الكلاودنج وما الكلاودنج، التقنيات هذه. فأصبح عندنا انفراستراكشر نستطيع ننطلق عليه. حملنا أيضا على الداتا سنتر أنظمة الBMS اللي هي إدارة المباني، فأصبحنا مبانينا الحديثة ترتبط بمركز المعلومات وزارة العدل. فأصبح في مركز المعلومات نتحكم في المباني، نتحكم في جميع التجهيزات. خدماتنا الإلكترونية أصبحت متاحة، عندنا 15 مليون وكالة متاحة من ناحية الاستعلام ومن ناحية الخدمات، صحيفة بيانات الدعوة. نطمح مع زملائنا أو شقيقة وزارة العدل الكبرى مركز المعلومات البوابة المواطنين، بحيث أننا نقدم خدماتنا الإلكترونية للمواطنين في منازلهم، من حيث تقديم الدعاوى، إنشاء الوكالة، تبادل المذكرات في القضايا، استعلام عن الأملاك، استعلام عن أي صك محاضر الجلسات القضايا تكون متاحة للمواطنين. أيضا حرصنا على العمل في محور آخر اللي هو المعرفة. وفرنا الأنظمة الآن في مراحل إعداد الأنظمة تخدم المواطنين المقيمين. الأنظمة اللي تعتني المعنية بالقضايا نعمل عليها الآن، وعندنا أن مشروع السوابق القضائية الآن في حدود 1300 حكم سوف ينشر خلال فترة 2 إلى 3، أيضا مربوطة في برنامج التقاضي الإلكتروني فبتصير متاحة للأطراف. أيضا عندنا نقطة اللي هي التسبيب القضائي. فمنظومة العمل اللي نطمح لها حقيقة كان لنا مشاركة خارجية فتبين لنا أننا متقدمين، وميزة أن القضاء متحفظ في بقية دول العالم جعلنا من الدول المتقدمة إلى حد كبير، أكثر من كثير من دول العالم، أكثر من كوريا، أكثر من بريطانيا، أكثر من جزء بعض الولايات في أمريكا، لكننا نطمح للأفضل ونسابق كثير من الدول في أن نكون أفضل. بيانات وزارة العدل، البيانات الغير الرسمية زي ما ذكروا في الأستاذ أحمد، اللي هي البيانات مواقع المحاكم، مواقع كتابات العدل، المواقع التي تؤثر، هذا بياناتنا متاحة للجميع. الربط الإلكتروني مع الجهات الحكومية والقطاع الخاص، احنا الآن تواصلنا مع كل البنوك للربط بوزارة العدل من ناحية الوكالات ومن الوكالات، بحيث يتحقق البنك نعمل بنظام إلكتروني متكامل. الجهات الحكومية، وزارة الداخلية، تكامل البيانات، الحصول على البيانات، التبليغ الإلكتروني في القضايا وفي الممتلكات. فالوزارة ساعية بقوة مع المنظومة العامة للحكومة الإلكترونية أنها تكون من القطاعات المميزة واللي تخدم وتنجز بسرعة، أدوات الإنجاز بسرعة. عندنا طبعا أداة مهمة جدا اللي هي الخدمات الإلكترونية والضبط الإلكتروني من خلال التفتيش الإلكتروني، أيضا بالنسبة للقضاة وقياس الأداء بالنسبة للموظفين. احنا نسعى بكل قوة أننا نوفر خدمة مميزة للمواطنين المقيمين في البلد. شكرا.
شكرا. Thank you. Engineer Majid talked about, of course, the infrastructure investment that the Ministry of Justice did, and on top of that, what they are providing now of remote services, including court proceedings, which is very advanced if you compare it even internationally. Also, they are allowing the people to connect from home in terms of attorneys and notifications of electronic notification of proceedings, and they are cooperating in that sense also with the Ministry of Interior regarding the, for example, fingerprint approval and other transactions. Thank you, Engineer Majid. We'll move now to our third speaker. The approach is going to be enterprise intelligence and analysis for e-government efficiency. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. And thank you for your time. I briefly want to just touch on what Dr. Al-Shaibi spoke about with regard to big data, and just maybe just bring things in a little bit of context. And he was absolutely correct when he spoke about the definition of big data. And it's governed by three things. It's governed by the volume, so really the amount of data that's coming through. The variety, so the whole bunch of different types of data that are coming through. Now you can think about that very easily. You've got different ministries providing data in different forms and making it available, be it through a database or a flat file, or even a physical documented information that's being provided and being made available. But it's all very, very, very different. And then the third component in terms of defining big data is also the velocity, the speed at which this data is being made available. Now you can simply think about citizens getting onto Twitter and tweeting about particular issues, or on Facebook, or sending SMSs and communicating. And then we're talking about daily transactions in the different ministries where we're issuing licenses, or municipalities, and all these transactions are being recorded. So there's a huge variety, and there's a huge speed of data being developed or being created on a second-by-second basis. So the real challenge is, how do we actually make use of all this information? All right? Because with all this information and all this data that's coming through, how do we make the data actually relevant? How do we make it useful? And that's really the key question that we want to address in one way. And once we've started making the data relevant, is there actually a process that one can follow that will help you make sense of it all, and in different ways? Because that also leads to an additional question with regard to information security, all right? Do I provide the general public with the same level of detail that I provide to the internal organizations, all right? Should there be a mechanism where when data is requested, there is a way of identifying whether this is a public user from the outside, and I only surface a specific level of detail to them, and if it's from inside a government entity, I can actually provide them with additional information. Because yes, it is about personally identifiable information. A very good example of this is where we worked with the Statistics Center in Abu Dhabi, where we've created some applications where we use the census data, all right? And it's very, very important that you are not able to identify any individual in any geographic area. So when somebody requests to use census information, all right, we immediately identify that this is coming from a public website where the information is being requested from, and behind the scenes, simple algorithms run to desensitize the information. And I give you an average statistic of the average of a number of around 100 people with that specific demographic information living in that specific geographic areas. So I cannot identify somebody with a PhD who is a German expatriate living in that particular suburb. I'm not able to do that, yeah? I might find that I might have an average of 0.5% of the people in that area may have PhDs. But at least I've got a general idea of the information that's being provided. Okay, so it's about information security and making the information relevant. So the real question then comes down to, how do I manage this information? Well, this is a very good question because it really comes down to infrastructure and architecture. What happens behind the scenes to collect the information and make it relevant and usable? There's an example in one of the discussions that I used yesterday with one of the guests that came to talk to us, where we spoke about standardizing the data, making things look business relevant. Now, if you take a field in a piece of data like gender, all right, we've got different systems that capture gender as a 1 or a 2 to indicate male or female, all right? There are other systems that capture the same information as a simple alphanumeric, as F or M to indicate female or male. And then we might have other systems that don't actually use English, it would be captured in actual Arabic, yeah? So how do I make that information relevant if I want to do an analysis on the distribution of males and females in a particular area, because I want to determine ultimately where I need to create new schools and new facilities to be gender specific, okay? So I might miss out information. Why? Because I may have selected only information where the information is presented to me in a language that I understand in Arabic, and I discard any data that might have FM or 1 or 2 coded in the data. So we have to find some kind of a framework that allow the data to be contextualized and standardized properly, all right? And I'm not talking about creating a monster data warehouse. All I'm saying is we need to make sure that when we're working with the big data, that there's a mechanism to make the data relevant for the information consumer, okay? So there we're talking about the management of the information. Now, once all this data is there, all right, how do we start turning it into enterprise intelligence, all right? Well, what we need to do is go through a data discovery exercise. And again, this talks about the types of people that we may have available with the skills that can do that. You may have heard of terms like data scientists, for instance. And the moment they add the word scientist to a job title, it sounds very, very important and very, very clever. Now, I would put it to you that anybody can be a data scientist if they have two things. One, they're not afraid to open up a piece of software and start working with the data, but if they have an understanding of the data, all right, what the data is presenting, and they also have a business context, all right, a business understanding of the data that they're working with. Because what they need to be able to do is as they start discovering and working with the data, they can actually start asking questions as they come up. So a simple example would be where I decided just to see if I'm talking about rates of, if I'm talking about Ministry of Transport, I want to see the total number of accidents over a period of time. And I simply drag and drop a date variable, and I drag the number of accidents. And I can see over time how the rate of accidents increased or decreased. Then I might say, okay, but what I've got this information. What about if I compare over this timeline different accidents in different geographic areas? Add that to the information. And then I might say, okay, I've got different types of accidents in different areas. And I start adding more detailed information, and I start discovering what the story is in the data. And I start getting some context and some meaningful context from that. All right? That, in essence, is data science. Obviously, we need people with a little bit more skill that maybe are able to manipulate the data in such a way that they can enrich the data and add additional value to that. Absolutely. And then, we need to be able to actually work with that and again make it available to the general information consumers. So the next thing we want to look at after that is how can we use this in a meaningful way? All right, is there a particular cycle that we can use that will actually help us and actually start becoming proactive? All right, and this is where we introduce something called the analytics life cycle. So part of the analytics life cycle, and it's a simple 3-step process. First is the data discovery, all right, to really understand the story that the data is trying to tell us. Right? The next step from there is we need to start developing certain models. Now, what these models will do, or analytical models will do, is we create certain scenarios. Simple example, if I can stay with the Ministry of Transport. If we start identifying that there is a particular trend that in a specific geographic area, there are specific types of vehicles that are at regular intervals giving or leading to accidents. And we might also include external information like the weather at the time of the accident. We can actually start running these models to understand where there might be other areas where there are similar incidents occurring, to actually identify particular hotspots. And what will we do with this information? Well, what we will do with this information is we will be able to proactively mobilize the traffic police to provide policing in that particular area. And we might also start proactively working with the entities that are actually managing and building the roads to say, listen, you may have to reprioritize the maintenance that you want to do, because we've identified a number of different areas where they have got similar attributes in terms of the possibility of accidents happening, and the number of accidents may happen within the next time period if we don't proactively do something about it. Okay? Now we can take it another level further, where we might have these models sitting and just monitoring data that are coming through, sitting and monitoring social media data that's coming through. For instance, we might have a particular area that we're monitoring for possible incidents, and suddenly there's a high volume of tweets that come through, all right? And we have to monitor these social media feeds, and we start suddenly seeing, but wait a minute, there's a very high volume of tweets referring to a particular geographic area, and that there's been an accident again, and that re-emphasizes the fact that our model was in fact accurate, and we can start doing something about it proactively. Instead of waiting for the project plan, going through the whole budgetary cycle, reorganize our priorities, go fix that, put traffic cameras in there, put speed control mechanisms in there, so that we can actually avoid future accidents. Yeah, because that saves lives and it saves money in essence. All right, that's the second part of the analytical life cycle. So the third part really is, sorry, let me just rephrase that. So the first part is the data discovery, really understanding what the data is trying to tell us, identifying possible issues that we can work with. Then this second part is developing a model around it, a statistical model. This is not a once-off model, this is a model that has to be monitored, it has to be redeveloped and updated as we go along. And then the model needs to be deployed. So what do I mean by deployment? This needs to be made available to all the systems that can actually leverage that analytical capability. And information is sent to the model at regular intervals, in essence at real time, so that pre-active decisions can be made based on what's happening right here, right now, or maybe doing some future strategic analysis around this capability. All right. So this really comes down to overall enterprise intelligence. And the nice thing about this is you don't need big data. So you don't need to have a room full of data to do big analytics. What you need is, you just need to be able to do some smart analytics and do big analytics with the data that you have. So looking for a technical framework that allows you, regardless of how much data you have, to start being intuitive about the questions that you ask that are in the data, and being intuitive about the models that you build, and in being intuitive and being smart about the way that you actually implement those results, and sharing that information back with the other entities that can actually leverage that capability in a way that's effective. So really, I think we're going from big data and big analytics to big data and smart analytics. Yeah? And that really kind of wraps it up in a nutshell, because what we want to do again is to go from being reactive to being proactive when it comes to applying our enterprise intelligence in a secure and efficient manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoine. And we'll go to our fourth speaker, Mr. Audrey. And the issue is security, governance, and risk management. So let's cover that, and we come to the questions. Go ahead.
Hello, gentlemen. So today we heard a lot about big data and about open data as well. So, and actually what is happening if this data will go out from organization, from the government infrastructure. So DLP or data loss prevention, so it's one of the growing aspect of our life at this moment. So all of us, we know that actually in the commercial life, it's very important to be sure that the business processes in the organization are protected. And actually we should focus more on the business processes than to somehow focus on the security, somehow protect confidential information in the organization, in the companies. So actually what is going on in the case of any leakage of confidential information, which could be as standard list in the oil gas industry, so it appears risk of damage for millions of dollars for sure. But what kind of damage will be in the case of leakage of confidential information on the side of the government? So sometimes you can't even count the cost, because it could be the cost of goodwill of the country. So that's, that is something what right now technology can help us to understand how to work with the data, how to protect the data inside of the government, how to build infrastructure in the right way to exclude any mistakes, even the employees in the government sector. For example, so actually it's still for sure in many places people are using papers to send this through fax or just scan it. And so here we are talking about physical leakage. But as it was mentioned here, so day by day our life became more digital. And became the digital, it appeared new gates how to leak the confidential information outside. For sure, it's a kind of social networking, so people like communicate with each other. So some of them want to really share the information with some others using any gates. Even we are talking about HTTP mail or something else. So actually, actually understand this and knowing that there are huge amount of information. So the smart technology can help us recognize what is confidential and what kind of protection we should pay attention on it. So how should we analyze what is very important and how to protect so our information not make a leakage. And actually, so in e-government, it's not only one case. For sure, government, it's a kind of structure which has also access to the commercial deals as well. And as you should focus how to make a life better, how to protect personal data, So not to exclude any leakage of personal data leakage. So how to protect this information? In some cases, it appears tenders and some not or disloyal employees became share information about tender lists and so on. So which appears damage here not in terms of personal data. So here's a physical damage which costs too much for the government as well. So for sure, we have open data and resources about in which school we should go with our children. So just understand information about some hospitals and so on. So and here as having open data, we have also hidden or again confidential data about personal, which consists in many parts of our life. And current and existing technology can exclude any mistakes to lose this information and in reality help to be protected from whole life infrastructure. So I suppose from this perspective, so going further, as our digital life became much higher in our life, so we should be focused how to protect this information, how to exclude data leakage, and how prevent this leakage. And technology help us to be sure that we can focus more on how to develop life better than to think how to secure our internal life in government and organization. And I would like to welcome you to understand how it looks, how technology is working. So what kind of mechanism technology, for example, our company is working, and how our products can help exclude any data leakage to be sure that government is protected, so to be sure that the data information is protected and focus again more on a user life than on secure life.
Thank you. Let's go back to some questions on this. We had many topics covered. I'll go back to Engineer ماجد. بخصوص طبعا الاشياء اللي عملتوها انتم في الوزاره، كان في تعاون ذكرت مع الداخليه. كيف كان يعني طبيعه التعاون؟ كيف كانت شو كانت الصعوبات بالتعاون لما تكون عندك سيرفيس عم تعملها عندك في المركز وبعدين عم تاخذ مثلا العمليه نفسها تاخذ ابروفل مكان ثاني؟ شو كانت طبيعه الصعوبات يعني في الكوميونيكيشن، في الابروفال بروسيس، في الليجل بروسيس؟
الإتاحة كان عندنا جانبين، جانب من جانب الوزارة. الوزارة ما كانت مكتملة خدماتها ولا قاعدة بياناتها، فما كانت مؤهلة في ذاك الوقت للتكامل والتشارك مع وزارة الداخلية. من الجانب القانوني والنظامي الآن الأمور مرتبة، وبالعكس أصبحنا نتكامل في أشياء كثيرة، خاصة أننا لنا علاقة تشاركية قوية جدا جدا مع وزارة الداخلية. القضية تأتي منهم ثم تدخل عندنا ثم تنتهي عندهم. فالعملية أنها وياهم في عبارة عن حلقة مستمرة من مجال التعاون. علاقة تشاركية. هي المعلومات إذا ما جت إلكتروني فيه كانت تأتي ورقي على أي حال، فالآن أصبحت إلكتروني، وعندنا طموح زي في إجراءات قضاء التنفيذ وأخذنا موافقتهم المبدئية، اللي حتى في قضاء التنفيذ لما يكون أحد عليه استحقاق من خلال أمر التنفيذ من قاضي التنفيذ، وعند تسديده لو مساء عن طريق خدمة سدد والتي نعمل مع الإخوان بوزارة المالية فيها، أنه يتم الإفراج عنه مباشرة بأمر من القاضي أو أمر إلكتروني بتفويض من القاضي. فهي منظومة عمل متكاملة للعمل.
إن إن شاء الله بنشوف تعاون أكثر بين جميع الوزارات لتسهيل خدمات المواطنين. We'll come back to Dr. Al-Shaibi. Of course, NIC is a big has a big producer of information also, and it also interferes with many aspects of information in other ministries. So, who do you think of the government benefits most of the big data? Which government agencies and how they use it?
Yeah, I think nearly every government organization can utilize big data. And I think that, however, some are more ready to it and some have a better business case. I mentioned maybe three different examples. The Ministry of Labor and their Saudization, which is a top priority for the government. They need big data to solve it. It's a very complicated problem. The Saudization, it involves all the way from the schools to the universities, from the public sector to the private sector. It's a very complicated problem. Visas, and to manage it, you need to combine this data from multiple sources, and you have to correlate it such that it decides in which areas to provide more training, which college programs should decrease the number of enrollees, which ones to accept. I also mentioned the Ministry of Health, also the Ministry of Housing. They have a big initiative to build and provide quality, affordable housing, or to distribute it. The decision who gets the housing or not is based on, I think they published it, they have millions of requests, and I don't think, and they don't have the millions of housing units, so they have to select to see who is justifiable based on the size of their family, their income, and many other aspects. There is also from the finance, the Department of Zakah and Income Tax, which is the tax or the zakah. Zakah is a pillar of Islam and everybody has to pay it. Is everybody paying their fair share? I think the income tax in all government agencies is a common problem in which people are in other countries, and even in Saudi Arabia, maybe are not paying either their tax or their zakah. And the department is responsible to make sure that, if you have a business and you have an organization, that you are actually, paying what you're supposed to according to the laws and regulations of the country. These are some examples, but I'm sure that every government sector, Ministry of Education wants to see the quality of their schools. The only way is to see, okay, the graduates of the schools, do they end up going into university degrees? Do they get good jobs? Are they focused on military or private sector? So I think one issue I just want to have to mention is that I think the big data, and I mentioned that the challenges that we have to face. Now, big data by definition is huge amounts of data. We're not, the definition, if you take the McKinsey structure, they are saying that they didn't put a specific amount of storage, since this is dynamic and every year the storage capabilities will increase. However, they are using it's 100 terabytes plus petabytes of information that is usually currently classified as big data. This is huge amounts of data, and it requires, not your traditional storage. You need enterprise storage. And this data, like I said, is combined from multiple agencies. So you have to have the maturity, whether it's in the data privacy, whether it's in the cybersecurity, whether it's to protect the data that you're collecting. And this is a very sensitive issue. It's a chain. If you have your data distributed over 10 or 20 different data centers, you are susceptible to any penetration of one, and all these data centers are connected through the GSN or the GSP. So you want to make sure that your chain is as strong as your weakest link. So this is also another very important aspect.
I'll go to Mr. Antoine. You mentioned that in order to make use of the big data, normally users can go ahead and do some ad hoc queries. They can do some case basis. So if they have a specific question, they try to make the case out of it. And that there are other methods where you really go into a full life cycle of analysis of certain problem, building the right information cubes or whatever you use for that, and then coming to the reporting. And that will be a long process relatively. So how do you compare these two methods, and which is
Okay.
more important?
That's actually a good question. I think there's two answers to that. The one is taking a very reactive approach, and the one is taking a proactive approach. So I would actually put the kind of ad hoc data discovery and analysis into a reactive bucket. So something may have happened, and I quickly want to do an analysis and a data discovery to see why this has happened, and derive some information and a report from that, all right? And that's all good. And the other one, in terms of using a more structured analytics lifecycle, actually is looking a little bit more strategic and looking a little bit more into the future. And I actually want to just focus on the Saudization as a baseline for this proactive approach. Now, obviously, it's a very important thing in the Saudi Arabian economy is Saudization. And in order to make that effective, we obviously want to ensure that when we implement the program, it is successful. And for it to be successful, we need people that are able to actually fulfill certain roles, given the different sectors that they're going to be working, private sector, government, etc. So there's specific skill sets that are required. The source of these skill sets are the academic institutions, most likely, that are developing these resources. Okay, so in the ideal world, we've got people coming out of university and the colleges, and they are earmarked for development, and they can go straight into the in-company Saudization programs. However, what we need to do is maybe build an analytical model to understand, number one, what is the success rate of the academic institutions actually producing the type of knowledgeable resources that we need, okay? And maybe go a little bit further and see, okay, when a student graduates from high school, given the field that he wants to go into, given the marks that he has, what is his likelihood of actually passing the graduate program given where he is right now? Yeah? And based on that information, we can see, okay, if this student who's just starting on his graduate program, if he enters this specific program based on his academic profile, what is his likelihood of actually completing the program or actually changing programs midway through his studies? Because that's going to impact the final results and the resources that the universities generate. That's going to impact our Saudization program, right? So this model, using the structured program, will actually show us and help us monitor where we are going to be 3, 4, or 5 years from now, so that we can make the changes now to impact that. Really simple.
Thank you. I'll go to Mr. Audrey. And of course, InfoWatch is monitoring the leakage of information, and they have some reports on that. What's the reason in 2013 we had a surge in leakage, and what major kind of information were those about?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So actually, first of all, when we are talking about leakage of information or confidential information, it appears the mind that it was a criminal or corruption scheme of the employees, so which is going to sell the database of the customers, otherwise make a damage using or selling tender list of the companies and so on. But so actually after our analysis, we have seen that there are a lot of topics when it was just the mistakes of employees. For example, may you imagine, so we noticed and notified the case when in one Scottish bank, so they just sending through fax information about personal information of all accounts, they just shift one symbol less. And in 3 years, it was sent a huge amount of personal information to somewhere. So, and actually only after one person came out from the bank, they recognized that it was kind of leakage. So other case has happened also last year. So in the United States, in Colorado, when one of employee of one government sector, sometimes we don't announce the name of department, so he lost a USB drive with information, personal information about 19,000 persons. So actually, as you see, not only understandable and direct way of leakage it appears, sometimes it's just mistakes of the employees, mistakes of the people. So
All right.
we should protect both ways.
Thank you. I'll open the questions for the floor before we go, please. في مايك.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. عبيد الشهراني، مدير الإدارة العامة لتقنية المعلومات كلية الملك فهد الأمنية. أشكر الإخوة المتحدثين. عندي يعني كومنتس وسؤال أسئلة. الدكتور محمد الشيبي من الأشخاص اللي نعرفهم جيدا في مركز المعلومات الوطني، وله باع كبير جدا في هذا المجال. وأنا أيضا بالمناسبة كنت من منسوبي المركز لفترة معينة في بداية تأسيسه، فلذلك لي ولاء قديم للمركز، وأيضا دائما مهتم بما يقدمه المركز. الحقيقة من خلال تجربتي في المركز أنه عندنا ثروة معلوماتية، يعتبر ثروة معلوماتية قيمة سبقنا فيها كثير من الدول، وحتى الدول الآن اللي سابقتنا في عملية التقييم، دول الخليج وكثير من الدول، في عملية أنه يكون عندنا integrated system على مستوى الوطن لخدمة كل قطاعات وزارة الداخلية. فهذا بحد ذاته كان يعني عنصر مهم جدا في إيجاد البنية التحتية المعلوماتية اللي الآن كل القطاعات الحكومية تستخدمها. فمن هذا المنطلق يعني تأخرنا كثيرا في الاستفادة من هذه الثروة المعلوماتية الكبيرة جدا، سواء للمواطنين أو المقيمين. فقلما تجد يعني هذه الثروة المعلوماتية في أي بلد بفترة متقدمة جدا أو سابقة، وكذلك قيمة المعلومات اللي موجودة فيها. كان فيه ورقة عمل يعني قدمتها من تقريبا 9 سنوات أو هذا في هذا المجال ده، إنه لابد إنه على أساس إنه يكون عندنا حكومة أو تعاملات إلكترونية متكاملة، لابد إنه يستفاد من الثروة المعلوماتية، وهو ما بدأ الآن وهو حاصل الآن، لكن كنا نطمع أنه يكون فيه شمولية أكثر لهذا الشيء ده. يعني من الأشياء اللي كنت أنادي فيها إنه يكون عندي كل وزارات الدولة لها جزء بسيط في تغذية هذه المعلومات بآليات آمنة ومختصرة بالنسبة لكل قطاع. فمثلا وزارة الصحة هي تعتبر يعني الصفحة الأولى اللي تفتح في حياة الإنسان من وزارة الصحة اللي هي من الولادة، فيفترض أنه مثلا يتاح له تسجيل المواليد على طول من هذا، ثم أيضا مربوط بالسيستم حق وزارة الداخلية، وآخر صفحة تطوى في حياة الإنسان هي أيضا وزارة الصحة، ثم أيضا تتدرج من الحضانة الابتدائي الثانوية، يكون فيه انتجريشن كامل ما بين هذه إلى كثير من الوزارات، وزارة العمل، وزارة التعليم العالي. الآن وزارة التعليم العالي نحن نواجه مشكلة لما نحتاج بيانات من اللي يتقدمون للعمل مثلا أو في الكلية مثلا، إن احنا نحصل على بياناتهم الأكاديمية مباشرة من خلال هذا. لو كانت متاحة الأشياء هذه كان يعني سهل جدا إني أسوي كلاسيفيكيشن لهم أو فرز مبدئي لهم بناء على البيانات الحقيقية اللي تأتيني من السجل الأكاديمي وهكذا. ثم أيضا نقطة مهمة جدا اللي هي في النهاية وزارة التخطيط، لو كل هالبيانات ذي محدثة، وأنا أركز على عملية التحديث لأن كان لي تجربة في عمل له علاقة ببيانات مواطنين أو هذا، فالبيانات يعني ما فيه نسبة صحة دقيقة جدا في البيانات المسجلة، وهذه ما هي غلطة مركز المعلومات الوطني ولكن من المستخدمين أو اللي يدخلوا البيانات هذه. لابد أن يكون فيه يعني تدقيق جدا على البيانات المدخلة على أساس أنه يكون عندي بيانات يعني الوثوقية في البيانات اللي موجودة والأب تو ديت للمعلومات. يعني مثلا واحد بياخذ يسجل الأدرس حقه في الأحوال المدنية يبقى معه طول الحياة، يعني ما فيه آلية إنه ممكن إنه لازم يحدث بياناته، سواء البيانات الشخصية، سواء الإقامة، وين مكان العنوان حقه، أو التليفون وإلى آخره. كان في يعني أكثر من طرحنا إنه يكون فيه مكاتب الأحياء تقوم بالعملية ذي، يكون فيه مكاتب في الأحياء بحيث أن المكتب هذا مسؤول عن الحي هذا وله صلاحية تحديث كل بيانات الساكنين اللي موجود عندنا، مثلا عنوانه والأدرس يعني بشكل خاص. أشياء كثيرة جدا ممكن الاستفادة منها، وأيضا تصب كلها في التخطيط، حتى على مستوى أنه ربط كل البيانات هذه المعلوماتية بالمكانية. يعني الرياض وكثير من المدن عندها خرائط ديجيتال، يعني خرائط رقمية. فمن هذا أقدر حتى أنت منشند أو هذا أنه ممكن يعرف الحي ذا كم فيه السنة الجاية من الأطفال اللي ممكن يدخلوا ابتدائي، كم فيه من وهكذا. ففي أشياء كثيرة جدا يمكن الاستفادة منها بالاستفادة من هالثروة المعلوماتية الكبيرة. في مجال آخر بسيط اللي هو الهوية الوطنية. الهوية الوطنية سمارت، فيها سمارت شيبس. يفترض أن سمارت شيبس هذه تفعل. ماذا بهذه السمارت شيبس؟
تعمل فوتوكوبي عليها وتقدم.
يعني هذه أنا سوينا بحث برضو أو ندوة في الكلية عن قبل 8 سنوات كيف تفعل هذه، وسوينا واحد من الزملاء بحث في ماليزيا، وجد انه سمارت شيب او الهويه الوطنيه عندهم فيها 9 سيرفيسز، 9 in 1 في الهويه الوطنيه ذي. فيها الملف الطبي، فيها الرخصه، فيها الجواز، فيها حتى انها ممكن تكون ماني ديبوزيتوري، يعني تحط فيها مبلغ تسوي فيها تشارج مثلا 5000 4000 وهكذا. فاذا يعني مع يعني الجهد اللي يبذلونه في المركز، إلا أننا نحتاج إلى تعاون أكثر وإلى الاستفادة من هذه الثروة المعلوماتية. آخر شيء اللي هي عملية الستاندرزيشن يعني مثلا عندنا الآن البناء، الكود البناء، ليش ما يكون عندنا برضو كود للستاندرزيشن للداتابيسز، بحيث أنه تستفاد من مركز المعلومات يكون هو الأساس وتوزيعها على، لأنه مثل ما ذكر الأخ أنه فيه مثلا الجندر ممكن يكون اف ولا نم ديجيت ولا كاركتر ولا هذا، فهذه أيضا من الأشياء اللي ممكن إنها.
متشكرين
طيب أنا آسف على الإطالة، شكرا للجميع.
متشكرين مداخلتك. الحقيقة نحن وقت البانل خلص، فما بدنا نطول على الموجودين. طبعا the speakers are here, so I encourage you to go personally for each of the speakers after this session later in the hall, so you can ask them directly your questions. Thank you for the intervention, and thank you everyone. Big hand for the speakers. Thank you.